Hello everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of Game vs. Game, as we begin with a bang! Breath of the Wild and Majora's Mask. Two similar, but at the same time, radically different games. Both of them have 4 dungeons, 4 main bosses, and a threat that is about to doom the world. But before we move over to the categories, let's go through some facts, beginning with Majora. Majora's Mask, originating from codename Zelda Gaiden, was the labor of love from director Eiji Aonuma, following a bet to series creator Shigeru Miyamoto to develop a brand new Zelda game in less than 2 years following the launch of Ocarina of Time in 1998. Happy soon 20th anniversary, by the way. The result was a classic that, just as good as a bottle of wine, got better and more appreciated by each passing year. This great sequel to one of the greatest games of all time earned it a solid Metascore of 95 for critics and 92 for users. Breath of the Wild, on the other hand, was developed for over 5 years, had one of the greatest budgets in Nintendo history, and introduced so many new mechanics that it simply redefined and changed the open world genre to becoming open air in 2017. Needless to say, Breath of the Wild received universal acclaim, dominated the Game Awards season, and is considered to be one of the best games of all time, with an unreal Metacritic score of 97 but a lower user score of 85. In other words, an interesting matchup of 2 Game vs. Game victors from the first season, and such a legendary duel calls for some tough categories. These are as follows: Story/main quest, side quests, game world, gameplay, dungeons, bosses, and music. The video game war between Breath of the Wild and Majora's Mask is about to break out. The story in Majora's Mask revolves heavily around the characters you encounter, who are all dealing with grief in their own separate ways. Why is that? Because tragic events have occurred in their lives, and if that wasn't enough, the freaking moon is about to fall down on Termina. Needless to say, the main quest in Majora's Mask is incredibly emotional, gut-wrecking, and motivational. Probably more than in any other Zelda game, you feel the struggle and need to want to save these people from utter doom. The only problem is you can't help all of them, as there isn't enough time, and time is key in Majora's Mask. Something we'll get back to in the gameplay section. The main quest is simple on paper. After an introduction section in Clock Town, you're tasked to awake the 4 giants to prevent the end of the world. This brings Link on a long and trying adventure, where he has to cope with situations revolving around death, grief, sorrow, and depression. In many ways, the 5 stages of grief. And it is this approach that makes Majora's Mask such an ingenious experience. The concept is simple, but executed in such a flawless way. It is a one-of-a-kind experience. Also, Majora's Mask has some of the most memorable and well-written character interactions in Zelda history. Combined with their characteristics are also careful programming, where they each have a set destination or job to do at a specific time of the day. So if you're looking for the same character in a different time cycle, you can use your memory to help find them. This also plays a part in side quests, which we will get to later. Things are not as urgent in Breath of the Wild, as Link has to first and foremost regain his memory after 100 years in cryogenic slumber. The world we are weaned into is the wasteland of a former mighty kingdom that perished 100 years ago. Unfortunately, this, along with the premise of a looming threat in Calamity Ganon, is for the most part all of the story the game has to offer before all of the problems begin to surface. Even though the cutscenes and storytelling in Breath of the Wild may be more impressive from a technical standpoint, it suffers from the lack of telling the story in retrospect. None of the central events happen in the present time, but are rather retellings of events that transpired a century ago. As a result, even though very dramatic and depressing, the attachment to the surrounding events is not as impactful as the ones in Majora's Mask. The same goes for the climax of the game, where Majora's Mask begins in the decisive confrontation with a crazy plot twist. Breath of the Wild is as predictable as it can get. The only objective is to defeat Ganon and free the princess. Nothing more. It pales in comparison to the final encounter against Majora deep inside the moon. Needless to say, the first battle goes to Majora's Mask. In terms of sheer numbers, Breath of the Wild knocks Majora's Mask out of the water, but does it hold the same quality? That is the question. Let's start with Breath of the Wild, which has the most side quests out of any Zelda game ever, and these can be divided between shrine side quests and regular side quests scattered across the land. These vary from simple fetch quests to deep and long multi-stage side quests where the reward might be entire settlements or your home. The problem is that these are few and far between, and most of the rewards for them aren't really gratifying, such as a new weapon or 200 rupees. Our previous examples with the house and settlement are unfortunately the rare exceptions. Most side quests are simplistic tasks that don't hold much reward. An example here are the Korok seeds. Need we say more? Okay, they expand your inventory, but when the reward for the remaining half of these is a golden piece of shit, then you're missing the point. Luckily, there is one area of side activities that Breath of the Wild excels in, and that's in its shrine quests. These range from the very rewarding cast questline to completing overworld puzzles where Eventide Island is a definite highlight. While Majora's Mask may not have nearly as many side quests as Breath of the Wild, the amount of depth they contain is not even comparable to Breath of the Wild. They are more complex, rewarding, and possible to mess up because of the time constraints in the game. Majora's Mask messes with your mind, but in return, you are properly rewarded for each messed up quest completed, for the most part in the form of masks, which functionality we will get to in the gameplay section. The point is, Majora's Mask side quests revolve mostly around the characters and personalities, and these are so well crafted and so multi-layered that no other Zelda game comes close. A perfect example here is the Anju and Cafe side quest. No doubt the best side quest in the entire series, as it stretches over all 3 in-game days and takes you across Clock Town, meeting a number of different characters and entering brand new locations. The reward at the end being the reunion of the 2 characters in question and multiple masks that lead to further side quests. Is there any point in continuing this battle? It would be criminal to not give it to Majora's Mask, who is the winner in this battle for side quests. With Majora's Mask only having 1 year of development time, it is understandable that corners would need to be cut when designing the world of Termina. Not only that, but it would have to be designed in such a way to work with the game's 3-day time limit, making it small and linear by progression. Good luck trying to access the Great Bay without Epona, or Snowhead without bombs. The game's hub, Clocktown, is placed at the center of the world, with each of the 4 provinces surrounding it. Think of it as a more simplified version of Hyrule Field from Ocarina of Time. Where Termina really shines, however, are the provinces, each filled with multiple races and characters that drive the story forward. As we previously covered, the side quests they offer add more depth to the provinces and their inhabitants. But none, I repeat, none of this even comes close to the incredibly ambitious world of post-apocalyptic Hyrule in Breath of the Wild. Yeah, it sucks that it's mostly a wasteland with a few settlements, but this was Nintendo's most expensive game to make for good reason. On the surface, what you see is one of the largest open worlds in gaming, with forests, rivers, lakes, deserts, snow, and a few towns and villages like Hateno, Kakariko, Zora's Domain, and more, though these aren't nearly as immersive as the ones in Majora's Mask. Where the world in Breath of the Wild really shines, though, is the physics and chemistry engine. This makes everything about the world behave in a realistic fashion, from the way animals react, to the flow of water, and the spreading of fire, all the while having a physics engine that would make the developers of Red Faction Guerrilla jealous. Never thought I'd bring that game up, ever. So even though Majora's Mask has a way better story-driven world, Breath of the Wild has one that will change the way open-world games are made forever. It is because of this that Breath of the Wild wins the battle for Game World. Majora's Mask is a game that only took about 1 year to develop, meaning that there just wasn't enough time to reinvent the wheel. Even so, all new inclusions such as the transforming masks, the 3-day cycle, and the manipulation of this one is genius. Never before had Link been so versatile, being able to transform and play as a Deku, Goron, and Zora. With all its benefits and drawbacks, the gameplay in Majora's Mask isn't perfect. It is incredibly easy to get lost and run out of time, forcing you to start from the beginning again. Luckily, they added a notebook to make things easier to keep track of. The gameplay works in this game very well, and despite having a limited number of items compared to its predecessors, the game still offers more than ever needed. There are masks for almost any situation such as swimming, jumping across water, racing against fellow Gorons, etc. Other than the masks, playing as Link is very similar to how it is in Ocarina of Time, though it is much more advanced in Majora's Mask. So how does Breath of the Wild hold up to Majora's Mask's radical gameplay changes? In a word, well, to say the least. There is so much to do, so much to see, so what's wrong with taking the back streets? In all seriousness, Breath of the Wild doesn't just expand upon what Majora's Mask and even Ocarina of Time established, it almost completely rewrites the formula on how a Zelda game should be, mostly with the two genre-defined moves, climbing and gliding. Since Breath of the Wild has a massive open world, these two elements are essential in traversing all of Hyrule. And while Majora's Mask may have masks, Breath of the Wild has the Sheikah runes. There might not be as many of them as there are masks in Majora's Mask, but holy shit, they turn your world upside down. Well, not in that way, but in every other way across Hyrule. Breath of the Wild is simply a more ambitious game when it comes to its gameplay variety and how this one is used. There are so many more ways to fight off enemies and with so many different weapons that the game literally breaks them so you're forced to try them all. Yep, some people may not like weapon durability, but we believe it is essential to add variety in combat. And then you have cooking. Say goodbye to collecting hearts as you find a large amount of ingredients to create essential dishes to survive post-apocalyptic Hyrule. You will need this, as in this world, you can kill in one hit or be killed in one hit. Stock up on those iron shrooms if you want to increase your defense, or make some spicy meat skewer to warm up in the cold Hebra region. Where in Majora's Mask, Termina owns you, in Breath of the Wild, you own Hyrule. I didn't realize Termina was the Soviet Union. Breath of the Wild doesn't care how much time it takes you to complete everything. It is the definition of boundless. And as such, the game is much more enjoyable and overall more fun to explore. Despite being a close call, this battle goes to Breath of the Wild. One of the many things Breath of the Wild and Majora's Mask have in common are the number of main dungeons, namely 4. Both of them have a longer and solid build-up to them, which come from the necessity of helping out a tribe with a major problem. In Majora's Mask, these vary from infiltrating the palace of the Deku royal family, solve the many issues of a Goron tribe, rescue Zora eggs from pirates, and finally traverse a long-time fallen kingdom. It shouldn't then come as a surprise that Breath of the Wild has the same structure. You help out the Zoras by shocking down Vauruta, rescue the Goron Yunobo and then break your way to the top of Death Mountain, knock out the shields of Divine Beast Varudanya, and finally, reclaim the Thunder Helm from the Yiga clan, and with this protection, blow your way into Divine Beast Vana Boris. Nevertheless, this and the fact that most of the dungeons can be manipulated through either mechanical and physical means are where the similarities end. Since where Majora's Mask's dungeons are actual temples with unique themes and radically different interiors with underwater sections, ice physics, poisonous water, an army of enemies, and in several of these, multiple mini-bosses, Breath of the Wild's dungeons are more or less identical giant machines with the same interior design, lack of enemies, and mini-boss encounters. Instead of finding new keys, you activate 5 terminals, and they are simple, more shallow, and less challenging compared to the massive dungeons with depth, layers, and solid puzzles and fights found in the Woodfall, Snowhead, Great Bay, and especially the Stone Tower Temple. The only drawback for some is the 3-day cycle that might cause greater tension than what is really necessary. With that being said, where Majora's Mask has some of the best dungeons in the series, Breath of the Wild's dungeons are hard to classify as dungeons from a Zelda standard. As such, The victory in this battle for dungeons goes easily to Majora's Mask. We've said it once and we'll say it again. Zelda fans love their bosses. While most of them aren't that challenging, it is the spectacle they deliver that is truly entertaining. Breath of the Wild is a game that is filled with spectacle, so the bosses should be the same, right? Well, much like the dungeons, Breath of the Wild's bosses are also underwhelming, simply because they lack the variety we've come to expect from the Zelda series. Starting with the overworld bosses, they provide danger in places where you least expect them, like the Stone Talus. One minute they're fucking rocks, the next minute they're deadly fucking rocks. But nothing compares to the horror of the Guardians. They aren't technically bosses, but they have lasers and they're terrifying. I haven't been this scared of a piano riff since Super Mario 64. Dungeon bosses, on the other hand, are the definition of underwhelming, and they're practically the same bosses with different power-ups. The Blight Ganons are about as generic as they come, offering very little in terms of spectacle, though some of them are quite a challenge to beat. If only we had more bosses like Master Koga. Now that was a boss. Meanwhile, Majora's Mask had some odd but unique bosses with names way too hard to pronounce, like Got and Odalwa. Using the masks you acquire in the appropriate province is the only way to take down these guys. Unless you like getting trampled by a giant goat named Got. Seriously, who came up with these names? Admittedly, the bosses in Majora's Mask are far from the best in the series, with the real boss being that awful camera while trying to fight Gyorg. Fortunately, most of these problems were fixed in the 3DS port, though what really brings this battle in favor towards Majora's Mask is the ability to replay the bosses at your own will. This eventually became a feature in Breath of the Wild's Champion's Ballad DLC, albeit restricted to specific weapons and items, and this awful Instagram filter. In short, it seems like the bosses in Breath of the Wild were one of the last things the team worried about while trying to construct this massive game. So even though the bosses in Majora's Mask could have used some touching up, it wins this battle simply thanks to the boss rush mode. It appears we have a winner before the final category, and seeing that it is music, we all know how that goes when Breath of the Wild didn't include the incredible trailer theme in the main game. Not to say the soundtrack is bad, but when nearly every new and returning music track in Majora's Mask are a true testament of the genius of Koji Kondo, then Breath of the Wild doesn't stand a chance. The only soundtrack that can rival this masterpiece in the Zelda series is the Wind Waker. In other words, this category goes flawlessly to Majora's Mask. And there you have it. Majora's Mask takes a solid 5-2 victory, with wins in the battles for the main quest, side quest, dungeons, bosses, and music, while Breath of the Wild managed to edge out hard-fought victories in the gameplay and game world battles. With that being said, both games are masterpieces in their own right. And where some may enjoy the complexity and urgency of Majora, others may favor the free and unbound structure in Breath of the Wild. It comes down to the preference of each individual player. With that being said, Majora definitely had more effort put into its dungeons and its main town, Clocktown. If we, in addition, remember that Majora was developed in a little over a year, this overall is a well-deserved victory for Majora's Mask. Also, make sure to like this video, and if you are new, subscribe to help us on the way to our next goal of 150,000 subscribers. And to all of you who are already subscribed, thank you so much for 125,000 subscribers. Now let's continue charging to the next milestone. Finally, we want to thank all of our gracious patrons, and in particular, Royal Patreon producer Kenyatta Ali for their contribution to the growth and expansion of the realm. And on that note, we want to thank you all for watching as we look forward to seeing you again for Game vs. Game and the great Bayonetta battle in mid-February.